talk about this, and in particular, Robert will tell you, and I will support a bit in the second part from our perspective about how the world of outdoor advertising is also changing. I think everyone has heard about the company AMS, but to start, I will hand over to Robert.
Good morning, my name is Robert Bartoszcze, and as Kamil mentioned, I work at AMS. AMS is an outdoor advertising operator. We are the largest company in Poland. We practically have all types of media and advertising formats in this area, so we have a lot to manage. And today, together with Kamil, we will talk about an adventure, about how we approached digital transformation, because I am responsible for digital transformation in this company. We started as a company known to many as an operator of analog media, because even if you haven't heard of us, many people still see us, as we have billboards, city lights, and various other media across the entire country. And now a few words about what we did together. In the case of digital media, we reach about 80% of the user market in Poland, which is around 25 million people. And these are essentially television level reach. We reach such a large number of people. We operate in over 30 metropolitan areas and urban centers, meaning we are visible in both large and small towns. So in fact, we have something to manage. Can I continue? And now a few words about what an advertising product looked like for an operator like ours, in order to understand why we started doing different things and where we are now. Several years ago, the outdoor market, when there were no digital media, was essentially based on geography. Of course, now, even for analog media, there are various studies, measurements, and so on. But for decades, both marketers and outdoor operators functioned based on the address. Naturally, the location of the media was very important. It had to be in areas with clusters of people, and so on, but the audience wasn't specifically measured. However, at a certain point, digital media started to appear. Digital media offer various possibilities because they can be managed remotely, targeted, and so on, but this targeting is only possible if we know exactly who is in front of the media. We need to have this researched. We need to have data on these media, on the audience in front of the media. So everyone who starts this adventure with digital advertising media initially operates differently. They create loops. Within loops, we have the frequency of broadcast per minute, per hour. It's secondary. How often such a campaign will be carried out. However, to get the most out of such campaigns and to properly target the audience, the campaign for the client, we really need to have a complete set of information about what's happening in front of the media. In the meantime, the entire digital world has come to us. The internet has appeared. And each of us uses a phone. So everyone who targets ads or for phone users, or even the screen in front of a computer, because computers are also personal. Essentially, we have one-to-one targeting. We can defend ourselves more or less against whether someone profiles us or not. But in practice, we are all being profiled. And outdoor advertising has lagged a bit, not only in Poland, but on a global scale. In the last few years, technical and operational possibilities have emerged to start measuring the audience in front of the displays. And basically, as we began the digital transformation, we faced the challenge of where we would like to be in a few years. And that is our goal, to be like online, meaning we target the audience, meaning contacts. The currency for settlements is contacts. This is what media houses expect. This is what clients expect, because no one wants to waste money when they are not sure if what is being broadcast or displayed somewhere is reaching the group of people they need. Can I continue?
Yes. I will also add one important thing that has come up many times in our conversations, which is that the generation of marketers operating in the market and spending this money and advertising budgets, and increasingly using digital media, has also stopped feeling comfortable with the traditional purchasing model because everyone is accustomed to this model. So on one hand, it's about efficiency and new products and so on. And on the other hand, it's about keeping up with the audience, because ultimately the buying persona of AMS is also someone responsible for spending the marketing budget.
Exactly. And the project has been ongoing for, I think, over 5 to 7 years, depending on which stage it was, because we had to build these carriers in the first place. Building such a network of public space carriers is not just a matter of spending money, capex, and setting up these carriers. It's a process of obtaining permits. This is public space. These are, for example, galleries that also allow being in their facilities under various conditions. So it was divided into different stages, and of course there was the process of building coverage, which means constructing the carriers. There was a part related to the infrastructure for broadcasting all of this, but in order for contacts to be the currency, data was needed. And simultaneously, even though we didn't have this data yet, campaigns were being conducted, but we were trying to acquire this data, and it turned out that it's not that simple for public spaces, because where do you get this data from, and what data should it be? There is no single common description of public space, how we move around. There is GDPR. There are, of course, some Wi-Fi beacons and so on, but these are very fragmentary pieces of information. We do have some information, for example, from malls about footfall, about movements, but they are also very fragmentary, and malls are reluctant to share them because they fear that, for instance, a tenant might say, sorry, there were supposed to be more people, there are too few, and so on. So these are operational, these are formal and technical problems. We have tried a few times to access mobile data from operators and non-operators, which is also not very easy. Operators didn't have much of that. I mean, at that stage, they didn't have much of that data and didn't plan to use it for external sharing. Now it's changing a bit, but even so, it's still not that simple. But companies have emerged that, thanks to applications on phones, because essentially we have a lot of different applications there, share information through various API SDKs, for example, to advertising networks. So we also started experimenting with acquiring such data about movements around our media. And this is one of the sources we are currently using. We added data from the Central Statistical Office, GOS, to this, but we still didn't know, for example, how people behave inside, say, galleries who pass by our media, because just the mobile phone is not enough here. We addressed the building somewhere, but we don't know how people move around. Here, artificial intelligence came to our aid, along with a company that had a product which, by taking hundreds of thousands of photos while moving around the gallery, analyzed people in clusters around our media. From this, we managed to create certain movement models, some levels of density near the media. And again, this is another separate data source. We are building this entire network, and now we don't know what to do with this data because we have several essentially inconsistent data sources, not from all locations. Some are, let's say, replicable, and some are not. And we started talking to several companies in the market about what we can actually do with this data. One of these companies was, of course, Alterdata. We started talking with Kamil to see if they could dive into this data to tell us what can be done. We had a general goal, but we didn't know if what we had was sufficient or to what extent it could be used, and so on and so forth. And that's roughly how our collaboration began. The colleagues prepared some assumptions for us about what could be done with this data. These were various POCs and R&D, because they themselves were not sure if they were, I don't know, not nicely structured or not, or if they could be mixed together at all to create a common denominator and model. So That's what the situation with the data looked like.
I will add here from the challenges side, because actually our first contact was probably 8 years ago, when together with our mutual colleague Waldeck, we purchased a data sample from T-Mobile, which turned out to be completely useless in the end due to the telecommunications law and anonymization. Because in the end, we might think that the mobile network is tracking us, and indeed it does, but the BTS towers have large ranges, so if someone is walking down Marszałkowska Street, they might actually be on Jana Pawa Street, and it doesn't necessarily mean they are passing by a specific billboard. But at the stage, Robert is talking about, it's actually interesting because we didn't meet based on a specific range that is known. There was the goal that Robert mentioned, and it was known. There was already a kind of ingrained thinking at AMS that the advertising audience could be modeled in a certain way, precisely, thanks to these studies on analog outdoor advertising and so on. But how to connect all of this? Because from a database point of view, as some of you work with daily, there is no obvious key by which these data can be connected. Because here we have some pseudo-anonymized data from those who display these ads. Here we have some completely anonymous data related to, in fact, the flows of some people, which should be immediately assumed that these distributions are unrepresentative, right? Because these are some skewed data, right? Because, for example, if we have, I don't know, data from mobile games that often display ads, they do not reflect the real demographics or flow, but rather a skewed one, right? And that's like another challenge. In addition, there is information from qualitative research, like Robert mentioned, from the aforementioned startup that took these photos and, let's say, some anonymized but demographic cross-section of people in specific locations around the media. Again, there is no simple anchor point to connect this data together. And so we all really face the challenge of creating a certain intellectual econometric model of population flow over time with daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly seasonality, overlaid with some demographic data that we have in an inconsistent and distorted manner in various places, in order to try to reflect this reality and build a virtual yet close to real representation of people who potentially come into contact with this advertisement. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the company AMS has its own IT systems, its own reporting and so on, but they are primarily focused on operational processes. But to work on this, the second challenge that immediately arose was where to do it. So I'm somewhat referring to the earlier discussions here, because you need to input the data somewhere, model it somewhere, create models, and then apply them somewhere. So there were at least these challenges, with the first one being the most important. I mean, data, meaning where to get it from and whether it makes sense. The second is how to combine all this into a model. And the third is purely operational, that it needs to be executed somewhere.
That's right. And especially since before this stage, AMS was a typically analog company. So various processes related to decision-making, modeling, and so on were not based at all on what we are talking about today at this conference.
That's true. A lot has happened during this time.
That's right.
And now, here, we have a slide that has appeared in various versions in previous presentations, showing the transition from having no analytics to descriptive analytics that describes a certain reality. We are moving towards attempts at prediction, what the colleagues also showed with predictions, and so on. Why did something happen? What might potentially happen? To such perspective analytics that allows us to make decisions, so to speak, moving forward, which suggests what should be done. I mentioned this slide here because it fits very nicely, the AMS project, who with digital out of home and building this audience and creating a digital product essentially based on this information, it fits very nicely into these few points. Well, the lack of analytics was like sales in a loop, which is the first stage of digitization, meaning Robert. And the team started building displays, essentially creating the means to show advertisements there, which is sales in a classic model like in regular outdoor advertising. And now this aspect that we've already mentioned, namely descriptive analytics, the attempt to describe reality as it is. But as has already been mentioned, there were many inconsistent pieces of information from various data sources that at first glance seemed unconnectable. And really, the first challenge in this area was to build a realistic description of reality. Now, at the moment when an attempt has been made, we need to try to answer how we can further enrich this information, and then, so to speak, by adding qualitative research or other sources, try to describe the audience in all possible dimensions. And now the most important thing is what's next. We have some historical data, some qualitative, so to speak, point studies that describe something. And based on this, we need to create models that predict what this audience will look like over time in the future, but also what goes much further. In fact, next, we need to create algorithms that will allow us to fill this business model of programmatic sales, meaning that I buy access to a specific audience. And therefore, the algorithm should plan the display of this campaign on the appropriate set of media in the appropriate, so to speak, time intervals, so that it is consumable, and also to manage the aspect of multi-threading. Because in fact, we have many clients who buy these ads and have similar or divergent expectations. And now, there is also the whole aspect of these programmatic algorithms that allow us to conceive and then send to the systems what should be displayed, when and why, right? So here we have a very nice, let's say, cross-sectional view of this analytics, which touches on all aspects piece by piece.
Yes. And now, basically, this slide is just a backdrop for further discussion because there was a lot of work, it was difficult, and not necessarily with the guarantee of success that we had imagined. And we have reached the point where now planners or traffic managers, that is people who prepare such campaigns for clients, are able to initiate a campaign using a fairly simple tool, which then goes into the grinder of all these underlying algorithms and gets distributed and propagated across these media. And now we will try to talk a bit about what happens in the background.
Yes, what you see here is not a presentation slide, but actually a screenshot from a tool that an ad planner uses when selecting specific campaign goals, the number of broadcasts, geography, estimated potential media usage, and the value of such a campaign, right? So a view of the actual tool that people use.
A bit more because these are integrations with CRM, with some other systems, but...
Of course, just one example screenshot.
Exactly.
And now, about the solution itself, maybe you can start.
So maybe I'll try to explain what a typical campaign looks like. Let's assume someone buys, let's say, 1 million contacts across Poland and wants it to be evenly distributed. So we initiate such a campaign. Such a campaign in the background must initially calculate how much and where it will correspond to actual emissions. Because if we buy, say, 1 million contacts, then in front of one medium, at a given moment, there are 5 people, in front of another 2, and somewhere else a different number. And now we start the processing. We already know roughly where and how many emissions should be made in a given period of time. And we try to push it to the media. Along the way, there's the entire transmission system to each medium in the country. And the emissions start, an arbitrary day passes. It turns out that for some reason where the power was turned off, the medium doesn't work, so emissions weren't made there. Or for some other reason, not everything was accomplished. All this information comes back to us in the form of logs. You could call them billing logs, by analogy to a telecommunications operator for the calls made. And now we start processing it again and check whether everything we planned for that day on all media, down to the exact second, was accomplished. If not, then we already have a certain backlog in executing these campaigns. And the algorithm first takes into account all the shortcomings from the campaigns that were supposed to be executed but weren't, plus all the new campaigns and changes that came in over time, because this is a constantly evolving system that must calculate everything in real time. All these things are processed again. Again, we take into account the effectiveness of each medium, meaning how many people statistically stand by that medium. But simultaneously, we also consider the past, meaning the last 24 hours. From mobile data, we have information about the quantitative movements around these media, and we adjust these campaigns because while we assumed in the model that there should be such and such movements, the actual situation can change. And for instance, there was a match in a given place, a very large crowd, which causes changes in the execution of contacts, or conversely, there is some construction work somewhere and there were fewer movements. So the mobile data we receive from applications allow us to adjust all broadcasts that occurred in the last 24 hours in order to once again correct the campaigns and replan the broadcasts until the end so that we can deliver them with a high probability of execution. And that's roughly how the business process of a campaign looks. And Kamil will probably talk about what's happening somewhere in those servers.
Yes. Well, here, as you can see, a lot of things are happening. Some of them are happening very much in real time because they are really related to incoming information. Some of it happens more proactively in terms of predicting what will happen, followed by adjustments and further planning. But as you can see, there are several components here, and this is also an interesting project from another perspective because it is a multidisciplinary project from a technological standpoint, because it's not just a data warehouse that simply calculates something. Of course, there is a data warehouse here as well, and its purpose is firstly to collect all this data, and secondly, of course, to perform various calculations, modeling, and so on. But what is equally important is that this system also consists of software and several types of it. This entire system is internally called Brain at AMS, which is like the brain of this entire business area. But in detail, it has several components. There is this element, which on this one example screen shows the application for the planner, which is a so-called DSP that allows these campaigns to be calculated. But this DSP is just one element. The second element is actually the ad server, which is the part of the application that continuously calculates based on the data prepared here, calculates and allows the distribution of these impressions. And everything Robert mentioned takes place in a special dedicated application. Ultimately, this information first feeds into another system that handles broadcasting to the media, and then this information returns in the form of logs and data. They are processed again, sent back to the algorithm, and returned both to the application so that planners can see the effects of their actions, what happened, whether they want to change something, extend the campaign or not, and also return to the data warehouse system so that they can be used in other systems, for example, in the billing system to charge clients for the actual use of what they purchased, as well as to the BI system, so that managers at various stages can see financial parameters, aggregate, or other indicators that are being measured. So, as you can see, there is the Google Cloud Platform stack here in terms of data warehouses, which is the place that prepares the data. But there are also two applications in different technologies, both Ruby on Rails and front-end, and so to speak, more Python-based ones are being developed. Yes, there are several things happening here purely in software as well. There is also a multi-cloud aspect here, because, for example, the web application is in AWS, and for instance, these data-related things this is a result of various events that occurred, so
not everything started up in the same place. And for various reasons, including ownership and architectural considerations, we indeed have several different technologies, but it was justified at the time we were starting.
Exactly. But it also shows that it's worth considering, meaning there isn't one right way. And when taking into account the assumptions for designing such solutions, you also have to consider the existing situation and various or other aspects, not just technological ones. Because if you were to take a blank sheet, someone might say, okay, then why do it this way? But we don't live in a vacuum. So this system was also developed through successive iterations. From our perspective, it is also very interesting because it is very comprehensive, both from the software side and the data side. We are able, so to speak, to take care of this product, and we are developing it together. I think that's about it for this part, right?
I think so. Unless there are questions.
Unless there are any questions, then we can, but we can also move on to
No, I mean, it's also a sales marketing issue, but additionally a legal one because of such industry nuances. All the campaigns last, and they usually have creations no shorter than 10 seconds. And this 10 seconds is due to the road traffic law. I mean, digital media located in the road traffic zone cannot have changing images more frequently than once every 10 seconds. And this is one of the criteria. Simply put, if someone thought it should be 5, well, for that reason, we definitely won't do it. On the other hand, if we wanted to display 2, 3, 4, or 5-second creations in public spaces, well, the contact with such a creation is very brief. So that's already a marketing aspect of why they aren't short. So they are usually longer than 10 seconds. Well, probably for some product convenience, they might be 15, 20, or some such multiples of 5 seconds above 10. And if you're asking now, the crux of the matter is how to ensure that these campaigns deliver in terms of context. There is no 100% guarantee for that. Because if a campaign ends on a given day, and for some reason, I don't know, an Armageddon occurs, and there's no traffic around those media, then we might deliver it at, for example, 95% or 98%. And this is already a matter of more the product sell. And somewhere, in the general terms, we guarantee clients a certain level of campaign delivery. If we do not deliver these campaigns at that level, then there is a complaint process, and we can either reduce the invoice or extend the campaign to ensure delivery. However, there are certain campaign configurations that are extremely difficult to deliver. And for those, we sell them in a best effort model. So someone orders a certain volume of contacts or emissions, let's say 100,000, but selectively chooses media that are either very busy or difficult to deliver the campaign on because it is very large with some additional criteria. And we say, sorry, but this will be best effort. If we deliver 80% of this campaign to you, then you will pay for 80%. But to be fair, we don't take 100% if we don't deliver it. If at the beginning we see that we have it quantified in such a way that these types of campaigns or with such parameters are by definition executed in a best effort model, and that's it. We're listening. Actually, no. I mean, with those beacons, we have already done such R&D and POC. However, it cannot be effectively measured with such sensors, such detectors. That's exactly why the whole story with Kamil was necessary, because we had to model it with various data. For example, from Proxy Cloud, we know what the movements are within a given radius from the carrier, meaning we have such polygons created around each carrier, and we know how many in the last 24 hours there have been movements, plus some demographics that flow from them. In the case of galleries, we additionally have annual foot traffic, We then mix the movements around the medium with some knowledge of what the reference point is on the scale of the entire group of people moving there. Additionally, from this mobile data, we have seasonality, because this curve shows us like our daily, weekly, and monthly distributions. So we can prepare trends from this. Inside the gallery, as we mentioned, we had the company CTCI, which conducted measurements of movements around the medium in a certain number of galleries. So we knew we had these heat maps showing how many people move in these areas. We also set some margins, assuming that the creation is visible from X meters. So we excluded everyone who stands far away because they might be approaching from the backside and so on. And these were the initial input data just for POCs and so on. Later, it was repeated 6 times to feed the model to make it as accurate as possible.
Yes. So there isn't a single source of information about who, when, and in what quantity. But the biggest challenge, as we mentioned here, is that there is a lot of information. Their continuity over time varies, and their content differs. And in reality, you have to verify them against each other to create an econometric model of the audience moving in front of the screens. Inspiring trust among marketers, because it's also about the fact that we are aware it's econometric, but it must reflect a reality as close as possible so that those buying such advertising can trust it, right?
That's right. So how did it start? Because we're basically starting to summarize this stage of our collaboration within this presentation. When we began the collaboration, we didn't know if it would succeed, primarily because of the data. I say this because it's not like the world would have ended for us. In many cases, there are plenty of operators who don't work based on data, or at least not in the way we've shown here. And such sales by addresses, loops, and so on normally function somewhere. There are clients who buy it and so on. However, we, as the largest or one of the largest companies, depending on the segment, were somewhat obligated by our clients, by media houses, who are also heavily digitalizing and saying, listen, where are the users? Where are the clients? Show us the data, because we also need this information for our clients. They are essentially intermediaries in various advertising campaigns, and either we move to the internet or we move to television, or you show us that the audience is there, and it's enough to say they are because someone took a picture. However, with a large number of media, with a large audience, it needs to be strongly parameterized. And when someone says check, we have to deliver it. And only later, when it initially turned out from the extensive and thoroughly detailed preliminary initial data from these extensive POCs that something could be developed from it, did the real hard and detailed and comprehensive work begin to transform such comprehensive and reliable R&D results into a project, product, and process that operates consistently and reliably to this day.
Yes, so to summarize the steps, undoubtedly the search for the holy grail of data was, so to speak, the beginning, and it will continue to exist, right? In this type of project, because new data sources, new ideas, expanding this to other areas, other mediums in different places can bring about new challenges. Where to get information from there? Or maybe
the issue of data hygiene, because these data also need to be monitored and maintained in some way, because partners who provide data can also make mistakes. So we need to control this at several stages.
Exactly. Here, what has been mentioned is very important. By the way, in Krzysztof's presentation, this was also somewhat mentioned, and this wasn't planned. I can say right away. When entering this project, neither AMS nor we were sure that it would definitely succeed, in the sense that it relates to our introduction about being open to experimentation. The point is that not all such challenges can be tackled by defining in advance that they will succeed. There's a goal, here are the steps, and we will estimate that this will be done this week, that next month, and something else later. At this stage, very often with such innovative things, you need to be ready to experiment in order to develop any new value at all. Of course, later on, during the actual implementation of the project, they proceed in normal, predictable ways with specific, so to speak, budgets, deadlines, and so to speak, projects, right? Because at that point, specific people are working on various technical and analytical tasks, but the stage of developing the concept itself is also very important. So Rome wasn't built in a day, but AMS Smart City, and City Life exists in Krakow, and Digital Out of Home also exists. It also operates commercially.
That's very good.
Thank you very much, Robert.